So you doing anything for Fat Tuesday?
Fat Tuesday. I am eating a lot this whole week, so there's a
intentionally, or is that just like did it casually land that way?
It's just the once I announced that the transition was coming, I got a whole bunch of breakfast and lunch invites just as a.
Oh yeah, you were telling me that
hey,
just every single day you're pretty much locked in
pretty
for a
much.
meal,
and it's great. Like it's all people I love to be with, and not that there's anybody I really don't love to be with, but yeah, it's just kind of a. Let's appreciate each other tour, and it's pretty fun.
That's not a bad way to kind of wrap things up, and for Fat Tuesday being the quintessential, hey, let's eat too much, but do it on purpose.
Right. We did have pancakes on. I guess it was Saturday morning, so we got our pancakes in early because I don't know if you Shrove Tuesday or Fat Tuesday, like the tradition is pancakes.
That is part of it, yes. And we are going to be doing. I don't remember. I used to know the answer to this. So like half of my crew is from Louisiana.
Okay.
And so last night, we did a bunch of boudin, and then did this huge pot of gumbo, which
I love gumbo.
My house currently smells like gumbo in every crevice. I didn't realize because he normally. He's from Lafayette, and he was a chef, so he's like got like the trifecta of like just all these raised in Louisiana, taught to cook in Louisiana, is still very just Cajun at heart, and so his
just
gumbo
embodies
is
that around.
insane. Yeah. It's so good. I actually have not had better gumbo outside of being in New Orleans and going to like some 5-star restaurant, and I would say it's on par with that.
Wow.
It was incredible. And so
choose your friends wisely, folks.
Yes. Yeah. Hang out with some Cajuns. No, we got very stupid with how much we ate last night, and I am not regretting any bit of it. I feel very fat right now, and it ain't even Tuesday yet.
I mean, I just want to return to the period of like the Middle Ages where being fat or like just having
the look.
Like that was the look of because you were rich and you could afford it. And
you could actually afford to eat.
I would love to just eat as much as I could. Yeah, that'd be great.
What a superpower.
Welcome
to Sunday Plus.
Yeah, welcome to Sunday Plus.
So yesterday we did was it triple baptism?
Triple baptism. It was
triple baptism. It's been a minute since I've seen one of those.
It was cool.
Okay, so what was the connection with the three families?
So
or was
the three moms are sisters. It's Jack and Barb Rorig's kids, Elise, Brennan, and Andrea, and they grew up here at Creekwood.
Okay.
So I've baptized all of their other kids, Brennan and Elise had kids.
Some of them were the ones that are up there?
Yeah, so they were up there. Okay. The big brothers were up there. I did Brennan and Andrew's wedding as well. So I didn't do the other two's wedding. But yeah, they just kind of have returned home for this baptismal moment to be together. It's been pretty cool to go through with them. Because normally
the Methodist baptism, it's always kind of a big deal, but it's so different when you get into kind of the non-denoms. Have you been to like a baptism service?
I've never been. I've kind of seen them, but it's like just baptism after baptism after baptism.
So I've been to a lot of them, and there's always variations on them, but it is this just big celebratory thing, and it is like, hey, we're going to crank through about no less than a dozen of them. Sometimes it's like I went to one where there were 3 baptism pools going simultaneously, and there were these lines of people, and so it was something in the vicinity of like between 60 and 70 people.
Wow.
In the course of about 20 minutes.
Wow.
And each time, and so they had it worked out. I was like beyond impressed with whoever like did the logistics of this. I'm like, yo, that, because it was perfectly timed, and so each one, the person gets up on the screen, they get baptism, the whole place
goes
jumps
nuts.
in an uproar and is applauding, and then you have about 5 to 10 seconds of applauding, and then next camera, it's up on, and it's the other one, and then the other two are still prepping, and then it was incredibly well put together, and the energy for something like that is pretty cool. But you lose a little bit of that personal touch
That's
that we were able to do yesterday, and so. But that said, I really liked having more than one. I think it was kind of the right balance between multiple baptisms, but still having that personal touch. I don't know what is that. What is that like from your perspective? Like, what is your headspace going into giving baptisms, especially multiple?
Yeah, like, see, I'm the one who would say even for one person, we design like the entire Sunday is just around this person's baptism because it's just such a cool, important event, and I think to do it in the context of worship is appropriate, but it always seems weird when someone, hey, I want to get my kid baptized, or I want to be baptized. And then it's like, all right, so we're going to put it in between children's time and announcements.
Oh yeah, trying to work it in, especially on a communion Sunday.
Right. So it's kind of one of those logistical things of I just want to make sure it gets the right attention because it's one of our sacraments, and it's this initiation into Christ's family, into Christ's holy body, and so. That's where I always want to make it as personal as possible, is because it's a big deal. And
it's funny because it feels like it's more because I don't remember my baptism.
Yeah.
I was a baby,
right?
And I've seen pictures of it, and I'm like, that's cool, I guess.
Yeah,
but it's more for the family and for that moment of we're bringing this kid in, and so I get that, but I just find that real interesting.
Well, and for babies, it's like it is for the baby from a grace standpoint, but it's interesting is that it's almost more for the congregation of understanding when God started working in their own lives. So it's like this object lesson of sorts. Even though God is working in the kid's life, we're baptizing this infant to show that God has chosen them before they can ever do anything. And that is something that I need to recognize inside myself is, before I earned a whole salary, before I got married, before I did all this other stuff, like God chose me when I was imperfect and just not capable of anything as a little blob of goo as a baby. God chose me. And so hopefully it's a communal reflection for all of us to go through. And then confirmation is the continuation where kids, and it's going to be 8th grade next year for us,
right?
Is they stand up and say, yes, I was chosen by God and I choose God back. And that's where I think things get lost a little bit in, like, when people are comparing like non-denom baptismal ceremonies versus the Methodist is they say, well, yeah, you don't get to choose. And it's like, no, we do. We just call it confirmation, and it's a more intentional process of recognizing, but it's not that we found God. We recognize that God found us first, and then we grew into knowing God. It's the nuance. I mean, people's experience is pretty much the same, but the nuance of the theology behind it is, I think, kind of important.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's definitely an experience.
Oh, for sure.
And no matter what denomination it is, the experience is very, very intense. There's a lot of emotion that it gets packed into it. So I'm always curious as to, hey, what's going through your head before you're about to just bring this child into the kingdom of God, kind of thing.
That's where I always want it to be like special, and I think I lend toward a performative element, but I always want it to be about the kid. Like, I always want it to be about what God is doing in this kid's life, and the parents wrapping around and the community wrapping around, so that it's not just, oh, we added a little check mark to the stats sheet that we sent to the conference, or, we did, we're going to put this on social media, look cool. But it's like, literally, we recognize that God is doing something in this child's life, and we're recognizing that's cool. I'll tell you the non-denom, and I guess it was part of the Southern Baptist Church before, but I went to Saddleback in like 2016. I went to Saddleback.
Southern California?
Southern Cal, yeah. And I was at this seminar with Rob Bell and did some church visits. So, and I think I did 4 in one Sunday. So, like, Lindsay went to one of them with me, and then she went to the beach, and I went to church. So Saddleback was at night. It is a college campus. It is huge.
It's massive.
And it's weird because, like, their praise and worship, like, the whole service is like 2 hours long, and their praise and worship set lasts for like 45 minutes to an hour. And people just come in and out. Like, when I arrived right on time, and there was maybe 120, 200 people in this giant auditorium. And they're just doing their thing. It's all well produced. Eventually it grows to about like 800 to 1,000, maybe more. And as soon as Rick Warren gets done preaching, there's probably 2 songs afterward. Everybody just leaves. I mean, the whole thing is centered around the sermon. But
That's
the
so
crazy
interesting.
thing was
the worship good?
It was phenomenal. It was great.
But people didn't care.
People didn't care. They were talking, milling around. I mean, it was like, I've heard it like Elevate Life in Frisco is kind of the same way of like, while the worship set is going on, people are literally having conversations about the football game later that day or Friday night or something.
That is wild.
It was pretty wild to behold. And there were certainly people that were getting into it, especially as we got closer and closer to the end of it. People were more focused, like they had that rhythm. But one of the like associate pastors got up and he's like, yeah, don't forget, after service, we're having baptisms in the fountain outside. And like there was a loose thing afterward. It's like, yeah, and baptisms are happening. So I was like, all right, I'm just curious. So I walk over there and they've got this big pool outside because it's Southern California and it's nice all the time. And
it's like outside.
It's like outside. So it's not like a rectangle fountain. It is a fountain. And this guy gets in there and he, rolls up his shorts and he's just standing there. He's literally just standing there waiting to see if anybody, and there's kind of a crowd.
Oh, so it's not even like they know they've got a list of people that's they just go out there and like, who wants to get baptized?
And there was probably about 5 people that like decided that day that they were going to go get baptized.
Dude,
and
that is wild.
It was pretty wild. It was the only time I've ever seen this, and on some level, I was like, all right, what is going on in these people's minds? What is actually happening here? That
what am I witnessing?
Just decided because. I mean, I would say Rick gave a great sermon that day. It was very powerful, so I can see where the sermon might have led to some conviction.
Sure, I just feel that kind of thing feels like I will say I don't know if I agree with that because I feel like I do love when baptism is an adult conscious choice. Mm-hmm. But there's something about just a young baby being brought in. But the randomness of just like, you know what, today is the day.
Today's the day.
And that's crazy to me.
When all the liturgy we do, and even like what you're talking about, even though it's, the car wash baptism of going through, there's still that community cheer. And it's meant to be initiated into Christ's body. And so like to have it be randomly out in the courtyard where anybody... It's wild. Like, hey, we're not going to do this as a formal part of what we're doing as a church, but if you'd like to go do it on the side, people will be there. And it's probably a lot more exaggeratedly low key than it really was, but it was weird.
Yeah, because like the church I was at last was a Bible church, and so they have maybe 2 to 3 a year. Baptism services, and so it's right after the 11 o'clock worship service, and the very last thing they do is they say, reminder, right now, like in 10 minutes the baptism starts, and so everybody walks outside. It's in the lobby area.
I like that.
And they have this big thing that is kind of like a little wooden bridge walk over, and then they deconstruct it, and under it is basically cool. Kind of an oversized jacuzzi that you walk down in, and it's very cool. And everybody goes outside. They have like a little mini version of the worship band that's ready to go outside.
That's cool.
They have microphone with the whole PA setup, so you walk out there and it's happening. And then they're simulcasting it, so everybody can see it because pretty much everybody sticks around for it. It is kind of chaotic, but after every single one, everybody just like goes nuts and cheers and is like, it was a really encouraging thing. And yesterday kind of reminded me of that, which I thought was very cool.
And mildly chaotic with 2 out of the 3 children crying. It's like, don't hold me.
That dude. I mean, if you've been in the Methodist church long enough, you will see eventually a kid that's just like, I'm not having it.
Well, it's great. So I kind of mentioned this, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this to you, but so 6 years as an associate leading a service, we baptized a lot of kids, and none of them cried for 6 years. So I get here, and I have this like at least 3 or 4 year streak, and I keep bringing it up. Like, yeah, I've never had a kid cry on me at baptism, and I've baptized dozens and dozens and dozens of kids, and then all of a sudden I just said it like in the moment. Like I had a kid and I was like, yeah, and don't worry, I've never had a kid cry me a baptism, and the kid just blew up. Like I put the water on his head and he was just thrashing around, like he hit me and they kept hitting the microphone, so it made this big noise. And ever since then, it's almost a guarantee. I feel like it. I don't really I'm not a jinx person, but I jinx myself.
And then, so after that, you had to kind of like wind down and then get in headspace. Okay, I'm about to teach now.
Yeah. It was,
That's a pretty big downshift.
Well, and with Kevin being gone, there was kind of like the doing the announcements part and all. And
Yeah.
the transition point, fortunately, we did children's time.
Yeah.
And so Ava was able to come do children's time, and I was able to recalibrate a little bit.
Yeah, so you just kind of like resetting, sitting down, going like, all right, switch gears.
Yeah, well, and especially with 3 kids, and especially they're not 3 kids who are always associated with Creekwood.
Sure.
So I'm trying, like, I knew the daughters' names because I'd been involved in their lives, but like husbands' names are not always there, and like their other kids that only met like twice. And
Right.
so it was one of those like, okay, I really want to remember their names. I've got a sticky note up there just in case. And now all of a sudden I have to transition my memory to, oh, what did I spend time this week working on? Like that, it's just the memory recall part of it all.
Yeah, I mean, and it was crazy because the thing you were teaching on yesterday was pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's one of the more significant moments in Jesus's journey is raising Lazarus from the dead. I think it was Lance Marshall who preached at one point and was saying that was the inciting incident that ultimately led to Jesus's death, was because when he did that, it was such a public thing that that was kind of the
blasphemer
domino
moment.
That was the domino that started the process of Jesus getting sent to trial and all of that.
By the way, if you're in Fort Worth, go check out Lance Marshall at First Methodist Fort Worth. He's a phenomenal preacher.
He's a good friend, phenomenal preacher. I worked with him many moons ago, and yes, Fort Worth is a pretty great spot.
Yeah,
it's like proper downtown too.
Right.
Parking's not great, but if you can get there early enough, totally worth it. And so anyway, one of the things that I started to think about, because you kind of went through the whole process, like I was able to find 3 instances where Jesus like just very much raised somebody from the dead. It was Lazarus, Jairus' daughter, and the son of a widow from 9 or nine. I don't know.
I think 9.
Yeah. What is it about Lazarus's? Because it feels so much more significant than the other 2. He's still raising somebody from the dead, which is crazy, and awesome, and just that's God's power in its most mighty form. But why is Lazarus's feel so much more important, significant?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I'm remembering Jairus' daughter right, he's not even there. So I think it's kind of a like, yes, your daughter's going to be okay.
Right.
And so it's not like really a public thing. It's something that him and Jairus know about. And obviously Jairus probably told everybody because it's amazing.
Sure.
I think this was one where, there's kind of a dramatic buildup to it. We're delaying the journey. We're using it as a teaching lesson. And then they get there and there are apparently Pharisees on the scene. And I think Lazarus, from what we somewhat know about Lazarus, he seems to be somewhat of a wealthy individual, somewhat important. So I think this is not like a private daughter that's being, it's not a widow who would be unimportant.
Yeah.
This is an important guy who has publicly died. Everybody knows about it. Prominent family. And now Jesus is coming in very publicly and yelling, Lazarus, come out, into a tomb. And this guy who's been dead 3 days walks out. And I think there's got to be some fear from the other powerful people of, okay, we're really, where Lance, I think, and I would agree, is they've been after him from a legal standpoint. This may be the moment where they're like, we can't compete with this.
Yeah.
We've seen him do all these other things. Okay, we've kind of seen some other things in the past around, this corrugates with the Old Testament, and Elijah brings somebody back to life. But this is the moment I think they look and they're like, all right, we literally can't compete with this. This guy is something different. and they don't see it as something different of like, oh my gosh, wow, there's God's son who can raise people from the
Right.
dead. They see it as this guy is magical or demon possessed, or we got to take care of him. And I think being so close, that moment being so close with the beginning of the passion narrative where Jesus is going to die himself, for us as modern readers, it kind of adds some gravitas because it's such close foreshadowing.
Yeah. Okay. So back to Lazarus with it. So, I mean, this is the famous Jesus wept. And so there's kind of Jesus knew Lazarus, right?
Yeah, they were like good friends.
Okay. So they're good friends. Like, when is there other parts of scripture where it's explicitly talking about what their friendship looked like? Or is it just one of those, now that we're telling the story of Lazarus, by the way, they were friends?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember because I know that he goes to Mary and Martha's house a couple times.
Is that the one where Martha is like cleaning and getting
Martha's
mad
super
that
busy and
Mary's not helping, and then Jesus is like, "Yo,
yeah, like
Mary's doing this right. Calm down.
Right.
Stop cleaning. Focus on me. I'm right here." That kind of
Yeah. So and Lazarus was their brother. So
that's right. So he was there for that.
So I'm guessing he was there for that. And we don't. I mean, they're living together. They're probably not married. So I'm assuming that they're still in Lazarus's house, and he's taking care of them. So we there's some context clues. I don't think there's anything specifically that just lays out that he's good friends. I think it's more of the intro to the story is like your friend is dying.
Yeah. So we just have the verbiage it's kind of like, oh, they were friends, I guess.
Yeah.
Kinda.
And I assume because there's so many people that Jesus just randomly meets or heals or whatever, or something on the side of the road. And so this is the one that seems to have like an intimate personal connection where Jesus doesn't pull any favors for himself.
I mean,
I guess he eventually does, but
yeah, because it's kind of this weird thing. It makes me think about the fact that it seems like in the 3 years of ministry that the Gospels talk about, that dude was never in one place for like more than a day or maybe a couple. It just seems like moving, and just nonstop going, and then just doing miracles along the way.
Right.
Heal you, bring you from the dead. Let's do like water into wine. Let's go. Like it just nonstop, and that is just kind of bonkers.
Yeah.
And so the idea of Jesus having a friend that he's like, oh, my old friend Lazarus.
Right. We grew up together, I guess.
Maybe we just have to speculate that like, well, maybe so.
Right. Yeah. What is cool about going to Israel around the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum region is you hear about these places that sound so far away, like, and then they journeyed to Galilee, and then they journeyed to this. And granted, we were in a bus, but even just geographically, the distance between a lot of these places is actually really short. So they're small villages along the sea, but you could walk there in a day. So it
feels very attainable, like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when he's doing, most of the Gospels happens up in that northern region around Galilee or the Decapolis, which is on the Greek side on the other, or the Greek influenced state on the other side of the sea. So most of it happens up there before he goes down in Jerusalem. John is the one that actually has him down in Jerusalem really early on, and then he goes back up and then he comes back down. Versus the other ones are, okay, we came down from Bethlehem to be born, but then we're going to spend most of our time up here in the Outer Banks or outer region.
So if they had a motorcycle, how much faster could you get from
shoot, yeah. It's like an 80-mile journey between, I'm trying to remember what it is, between Nazareth and Jerusalem is like 80 miles. So it's literally an hour.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Because Israel's tiny. I mean, it is a tiny little strip of land that is amazing, is so important in the global scheme of things. But yeah, it's like, the whole thing is like 120 miles tall, north to south.
That's crazy.
It's really crazy.
The perspective that you put on that is kind of wild. Like I'm gonna have to go look at it. Google map this and look at it and just kind of pitch to zoom a little bit and be like, oh yeah, there it is. There's the.
I remember it's from Nazareth to Bethlehem. So the journey for the nativity story of them walking or taking a caravan down for the census from Nazareth to Bethlehem is 80 miles. And Bethlehem is slightly southwest of Jerusalem. So depending on what road they're going to take, how many robbers or whatever are in there, so it might be 70 miles or something. It's really not that far.
Doesn't feel so unobtainably like massive.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So the last thing I wrote down, and it was something that didn't really, it wasn't necessarily part of what you were talking about, but you said it just kind of off the cuff, and I went down a rabbit trail in my own brain. And then I had to snap myself out of it, so I wrote it down real fast so I could start focusing on what you were saying again. But I think it was in the context of like Jesus intentionally waiting on Lazarus. And you said something to the effect of, but Jesus had faith that it would work out or something like that. And then the thing that made my brain kind of glitch was like, Jesus having faith, but Jesus is the Son of God. He knows he's the Son of God. There's this notion that he knew things before they were going to happen, has this omniscience about him because he is, God and whatnot. And so the question I wrote down was, does Jesus have faith?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really challenging
I assume you've had this
question.
with like other pastors, like back when you were in school, and all the ideas feel fresh. But I was just like, I'm gonna get David's take on this.
Yeah, it's. I mean, from a Christological standpoint, there are people who have what's called high Christology, and it's like Jesus on the throne. Jesus knows everything, omnipresent, omnipowerful, everything. And then there are people who really appreciate the incarnational Christ of he's a human. He cried as a baby. He wet his pants. He got lost in the temple. And this very human element. And that was the Sunday school class I led, had a whole conversation around the divinity and humanness of Christ and why is that important? So I think even from a like divine God standpoint, does Jesus have faith? From the very beginning, we've been given this gift of free will. And so while there may be I know, I guess Jesus has to have faith. If we have free will and Jesus knows we're going to make bad decisions and yet still tries and does all that, there's got to be some faith that, this is all going to go right in the end. Or else, why try? Like, why not just blow the earth up again or something like that, So I think from a faith standpoint, and I think we even see it in Jesus when he, quotes Psalm 22 of like, my God, why have you forsaken me? I know this is going to hurt on the cross. This is going to be awful. But at the end of it, right, this is going to work out. So I would say Jesus has faith. I think he believes and he trusts that this whole thing is going to go down the way that he can control it, I guess, to be. But ultimately that through his grace and his influence that we're going to choose to go the way of Christ.
That's interesting because it does beg some of those questions of, so that would almost say like, where does he have faith rather than, and like what is it applied to? Because if he's got like, direct line to dad up there kind of thing, that's what was you ever seen the movie Constantine with Keanu Reeves?
I have not. No, I know of it, but
oh my gosh,
gotta go do it.
Got it.
Okay,
it's one of my all-time favorite movies. They're almost done with the script for a second one after like 20 years. But basically, he's a comic book character, DC, like a variation of DC Comics, or whatever, and he was given this thing where he can see demons and angels like out in the open because they walk among us. It's just we don't know that they're angels and demons, kind of thing. And then so he becomes like this person who exercises like demons gone astray and whatnot. And the comic series is fantastic. Okay. It's all centered around like a lot of the dogmatic Christology of like, Christian themes and stuff. The movie's amazing. And then there's this, and he's dying because he's been like a chain smoker his entire life.
Okay.
And he's mad because he tried to kill himself at one point, and he did die, so he committed a mortal sin, so he's going to go to hell.
So he's kind of in limbo phase here.
Yes, and so he's mad. He's like, I've done all this stuff for God, and yet because I killed myself and the dogmatic law says I go to hell now and stuff. And so at one point, he's meeting up with Gabriel just in like a church or something like that, and Gabriel's this snarky, kind of pompous character, and Gabriel's like, he's like, what does God want from me? And he's like, only the usual, have faith and all this stuff. He's like, I have faith. And he's like, no, there's a difference. And so that was kind of
It's a great question.
And so like knowing versus having faith, does that create kind of a separation of how you see things?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of kind of how to expound upon that.
You're just going to have to go watch Constantine.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, because it's a great question, because I'm trying to think of, faith is believing that which we can't see, according to Hebrews 11. And so there is I would say, I mean, I love Ray Fiennes in a Conclave, where he talks about without doubt there is no faith, and I heavily lean into that in my own life and my own ministry.
Great quote.
That's a great quote. But there's also an element of faith creates certainty out of doubt, I think, in that once you choose to have faith, or once you do have faith, you act in a certain way even amongst the doubt. And so if I think sports analogy, right? You can look at a shooter in the NBA, and there is the highest 3-point percentage in a season in history is like 42% or something like that.
It's like right under 42%.
I mean, so they're still missing over a vast majority of their 3-point shots, and yet they still shoot it like every time it's going to go in.
Yeah.
So there is a measurable doubt that shot's going to go in, but they have chosen to believe that they're JJ Redick or Steph Curry or somebody who can just nail it all the time. And so their faith leads them to act in a way that is incredibly certain. And so I think that's where I think Jesus obviously does have the pipeline of knowledge and is that omniscient presence, but with that clear conviction of who God is, what God is doing, what he is sent to do, his part in the play, and what humans are supposed to do, he never deviates from that course of action, even though humans are going to mess it up. Okay, occasionally, right? So he sticks to the plan. He has faith in the plan, and he carries it out, even though there's 63%, right, that the humans aren't going to get it right along the way. So that's what I would say is he has faith because he knows it's going to work, and he knows it is the way. So even if humans mess it up, the way doesn't mess up. Just the humans don't jive with the way. So he's certain in what the way is, and leaves the room for doubt, I guess, for people to make that own choice. If that makes any sense whatsoever.
It does. In fact, that gave me a very clear, different perspective that I'd never thought of before, with that notion of treating faith and comparing it with you're shooting the ball, even though you know that you are sub 50%. And so statistically speaking, the likelihood is it's not going to go in. Yet we've all seen those games where like somebody went like 8 for 8,
right,
or something like that from 3. But the word that came to my mind is shooting with confidence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because they know their own stats. The NBA players nowadays, they all know their own stats, and so but they still shoot with confidence despite those stats.
Right.
Which I then my brain started going, okay, correlating that to faith, and so living into that faith with confidence, even with plenty of evidence to the contrary or lack of evidence, however you want to look at it, that because inherently faith is believing in what you can't see,
right,
like you said, according to Hebrews. And so I'm leaning into this, living into faith with confidence, even despite all the things around it.
Right. So we saw Hadestown on Saturday night, which is a great musical. I wouldn't classify it as like my top 3, but it was really powerful and really well done. And it's this myth, and in the myth in the musical is the same story of Orpheus is this like naive son of a muse. So he's working on this beautiful song that's going to bring back life and spring to the world. But this girl, Eurydice, that he falls in love with is desperately hungry and starving because Persephone, the god of the harvest, has been taken down to Hades for 6 months, and everything is dry and cold and bleak, and there's no bread or anything. And so she kind of accepts this fate and deal and just kind of gives in to go down into Hades in the underworld and just live her existence there because at least it's warm and at least they have food. But Hades in Hades Town is characterized as this very 1984 industrial, like you are just a cog in the machine. It's capitalism to the like worst parts of capitalism. They're building a huge wall to keep everybody who's poor out. I mean, and
Wow.
so you give up basically it's like we find freedom by giving up our freedom in this element, and they become very mechanical. They don't recognize themselves anymore. They don't look anybody in the eye. So Orpheus goes down there as this like naive young lover kind of figure and ends up striking a deal and singing this song that turns Hades' heart around. And Hades says, well, I'll allow you to go, but you can't go together. You have to walk in front and she has to walk behind, and you have to make it all the way down this road back to the upper world, but you're not allowed to look back once. And so if you look back, then she automatically gets taken down to Hades forever.
Reminds me of Lot's wife.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a very similar story, and so Eurydice, who's been this naive, confident young man, all of a sudden is filled with all this doubt because he's seen this other side of the world, and so the entire time they're singing like, "Hey, we're coming, we're coming, we're coming, trust us," and he's just singing the like, "Why would they ever follow me? Why would she love me? Why does?" And it just fills with so much doubt that they make it almost to the end. And then he turns around and looks, and she gets whisked away.
Oh!
And so it's this really, really long, drawn-out song to take your heart away, break your heart at the end, because previously he had been so certain that this was all going to work out. And then that element of doubt entered in. And it would in any of us. I mean, we would all look back on some level and be scared. But if he had kept going just like 5 more steps, then everything would have worked out.
Brutal.
And so I think from that faith standpoint of like, if I'm shooting a 3, if I'm walking out of hell, if I'm doing that, like if I keep steady and keep believing and keep going, it's going to work out way more than if I stop shooting or backtrack or go back into my destructive habits that might have felt good for a little while or whatever. So I do think there's an element of faith of walking through the midst of doubt with certainty, not just being certain about everything.
That's a great parallel, great way to kind of roundabout look at just this journey and then kind of personify it through this very particular story.
Yeah.
That's cool.
What I love to, and someone, I posted a thing, during, I would call it halftime, but apparently it's called intermission in the theater. Mm-hmm. The first act was great, and someone sent me a Facebook message back saying like, "Oh, wait for the second half. But how amazing it is that story was 500 years old by the time Jesus shows up on the world, and how applicable it is to the Lot's wife story or, Jesus' story himself. And just beautiful how the truths of God show up in so many different ways across so many different mythologies and histories and all. And I think that's why Christ coming in person is so important, is because you see all of these things lived out and personified in Jesus.
Yeah.
That gives us a linchpin to say, okay, yes, if I have faith in this guy and follow everything he does, this is all going to be okay.
Just don't look back.
Don't look back. That's right.
That's a good way to close it out.
Yeah.
Love it.
I was going to remind everybody real fast, because I want to remind them of your challenge to take a breath this week. If they're watching and we're in worship, to slow down, take a breath, and let yourself center in just the existence of God around you and feel that peace.
Find a quiet room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not everything has to be busy today, y'all.
I like that. And on that note, thanks for joining us. What was that, episode 9?
Episode 9.
Wow.
We're almost to double digits.
Woo! It's going to be good. Thanks for hanging out. Peace.